There's a kind of person who doesn't stab you in the back. They hold your hand, smile softly, and quietly bleed you dry. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like a request, a need, a favor, a whisper. Can you help me? Can I stay the night? Can you talk just one more time? And so you give. Because you're a good man. Because you were raised to show up. Because you think strength means being available, even when you're hurting. But here's the part no one says out loud. They never stop asking. Because you never stop saying yes. At first, you tell yourself it's just temporary. They're going through something. They don't mean to take so much. They're just struggling. So you justify the exhaustion. You explain away the tension. You silence the small voice inside that says, "Why do I always feel more alone after helping them?" You think this is what love looks like. You think this is what friendship costs. You think being there for others means slowly disappearing from yourself. And one day you wake up, and you don't even recognize who you've become. You're tired. But not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. You're soul tired. Because you weren't just drained. You were used. Softly, subtly, systematically. And worse, you allowed it. Not out of weakness, but out of programming. You were conditioned to equate being needed with being loved. But Carl Jung had a different message. He warned that some people, some archetypes, don't need your heart. They need your energy, your light, your stability, because they are not built to carry their own shadow. So they look for someone who can, and they climb on top. They are the victim, who never takes responsibility. The pleader, who never stops needing. The chameleon who becomes whatever keeps you distracted. The judge who uses guilt as a leash. The mirror that reflects only your worst. You think you're helping, but you're not. You're enabling, you're bleeding, and worst of all, they never even notice. Because people who use your energy don't remember what it cost you. They only remember how good it felt to be filled. This is how it starts. With kindness, with patience, with silent self-betrayal, and this is how it ends. With a version of you that's hollow, bitter, and confused. Because you gave everything and they still walked away. You want to know who these people are? You've already met them. You've already let them in. The question is, are they still here? Mirror question. When did you last feel completely drained but too ashamed to call it what it was? Being used? From the moment you could understand words, they started feeding you stories. Not stories of power. Not stories of boundaries. Stories of obedience. Be nice. Don't upset anyone. Good boys don't talk back. Frume. Kindness is always rewarded. So you complied. You became the helper, the peacemaker, the pleaser. You thought, if I'm always good, people will always love me. And for a while, it worked. When you were 6, they gave you applause. When you were 12, they gave you approval. But then you turned 20, 30, and suddenly, being nice just made you invisible. Because here's the truth they never taught you. The world doesn't reward goodness. It rewards value. And sometimes, value requires saying no. But no was never in your vocabulary. You were taught that it was rude. That standing your ground meant being difficult. So you gave in. To everything. To everyone. Even when your gut said, stop. Even when your soul whispered, this isn't fair. You smiled. You stayed. You helped. Because that's what good men are supposed to do, right? Wrong. Carl Jung described this as the persona, the socially acceptable mask we wear to survive. But here's the cost. The more you perfect the mask, the more you forget the face underneath. You weren't kind. You were conditioned. You weren't compassionate. You were compliant. They didn't love you for who you were. They loved you for how easy you were to control. And the worst part? You started loving that feeling too. You became addicted to approval, to applause, to being the reliable one. But underneath that performance, there was a quiet desperation. A man wondering, What would happen if I stopped pleasing and started protecting? You see, there's a reason most men collapse quietly. They were never taught how to set boundaries, only how to keep the peace. But peace built on self-erasure isn't peace. It's silence. It's surrender. You're not tired because you help too much. You're tired because you never learned how to say, "This is where I end and you begin." You were sold a lie. That being soft makes you lovable. But the truth, being respected makes you safe. And you can't earn respect if you've made yourself optional. It's time to unlearn the conditioning. It's time to burn the script. It's time to ask the only question that matters. Mirror question. What belief are you still carrying that keeps you afraid of being disliked? There's a brutal truth about human connection most men are never told. Every relationship is a negotiation of power. It doesn't matter if it's romantic, familial, or professional. Underneath the smiles, the jokes, and the rituals, there's always a silent equation being calculated. Who needs whom more? Because in the economy of emotion, the one who needs less always has more leverage. That sounds cold, but it's not cruelty. It's physics. When someone can walk away, and you can't, they win. When someone can ignore your messages for hours, and you respond in minutes, they win. When you give emotional energy unconditionally, and they give it strategically, they win. This isn't about manipulation. This is about awareness. You think love is about giving endlessly. But what if giving too much, too fast, too easily, devalues the very thing you're offering? Carl Jung said that when we don't own our power, we project it onto others and become their followers without even realizing it. Think about that. How many times have you idolized someone just because they seemed indifferent? How many times have you chased just because they withheld? That wasn't love. That was imbalance. And here's where it gets worse. People don't always want connection. They want control. And if you offer all of your energy, all your attention, presence, validation without pause, you become predictable, replaceable, expendable. You think you're proving your worth, but in their eyes, you're just easy access. Your emotions are a currency. Your attention is a resource. Your time is a privilege. Stop giving it to people who treat it like it's free. Because the people who quietly destroy you, they don't scream. They don't threaten. They just keep taking. Until there's nothing left but a man wondering why no one values what he keeps offering. Here's why. What costs you everything means nothing to someone who never had to earn it. Mirror question. Where in your life are you spending emotional currency without ever checking the price? It doesn't happen in one moment. It's not a breakdown. It's not a crisis. It's a slow erosion. You don't fall apart loudly. You fade. First, you stop asking for what you need. Then, you stop expecting it. Eventually, you stop even remembering what your needs were. You become agreeable, supportive, convenient. You become the man who's always there. Until one day, he isn't even there for himself. This is the collapse no one sees. Because it's not dramatic. It's silent, gradual, invisible, and that makes it more dangerous. You stop speaking up. You stop pushing back. You let things slide. Because fighting takes energy, and you've got none left. You've been too busy holding space for people who never once asked how heavy it was. You tell yourself you're just being mature. That compromise is part of love. That empathy means staying, even when it hurts. But deep down, you know, you're shrinking, not growing. You're tolerating, not choosing. You're surviving, not living. And worst of all, they don't notice. Because they never had to earn you in the first place. They only remember you as a source, not as a soul. You've become a background character in your own life. Always supporting, always adjusting, always fading, so that others can shine. And somewhere along the way, you traded your voice for harmony, your truth for peace, your presence for acceptance. But Carl Jung warned, the man who does not confront his shadow is doomed to be controlled by it unconsciously. And this is your shadow. a lifetime of quiet compliance, a history of silent suffering, a story of service without recognition. You didn't lose your power. You gave it away piece by piece to people who never said thank you. And now you feel bitter. You feel numb. You feel used. Because you were. Softly, slowly, systematically. And no one is coming to rescue you. Not because they don't care, but because they don't even realize you're drowning. Mirror question. Where in your life have you become so reliable that no one notices you're disappearing? At first, it doesn't look like a rebellion. There's no shouting, no slammed doors, no long, angry texts. Just silence. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for being tired. You stop offering parts of you that no one ever bothered to earn. And for the first time in a long time, you listen to yourself. Not to your guilt, not to your programming, to you. That voice you buried beneath years of self-sacrifice. It's still there. And now it whispers. No more. No more fixing people who don't want to heal. No more rescuing adults from consequences. No more showing up out of obligation instead of truth. This is your inner rebellion. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission. It just begins. You don't explain your distance. You don't defend your silence. Because you've realized something terrifying and liberating. Your energy is yours. And you're finally done giving it to people who treat it like oxygen. They'll notice. They'll accuse you of being cold. They'll say, you've changed. And they're right. You have. Because for the first time, you've stopped bleeding for people who get paper cuts and act like they're dying. You've stopped carrying grown adults who refuse to walk on their own legs. You've stopped being the solution for people committed to their problems. And in the stillness of your withdrawal, you find clarity. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But who you truly are can only emerge once you destroy the false self. You built to please a world that never cared. And the world won't like your rebellion. Because your yes made their lives easier. Because your silence made their chaos bearable. Because your availability kept them from facing their own emptiness. But that's no longer your job. Their healing is not your purpose. Their comfort is not your mission. Your mission is you. Not the version of you that bends to survive. Not the version that smiles to keep the peace. The version that chooses himself without apology. You're not becoming cruel. You're becoming conscious. You're not turning away from love. You're turning toward self-respect. And that shift? It will offend people who benefited from your self-abandonment. Let it, because the man who rises quietly rises for real. Mirror question. When was the last time you said no, not to hurt someone, but to honor yourself? Let's be clear about one thing. Coldness is not cruelty. You didn't become distant because you stopped caring. You became distant because you started seeing clearly. Because now, you understand something vital. Not every emotion deserves a response. Not every cry deserves a rescue. Not every connection deserves access. There is power in warmth, yes, but only when it's a choice, not an obligation. You see, they taught you that being available makes you lovable, but what they really meant was, be easy to access, be easy to use, be easy to manipulate. And so, the moment you pull back, the world gets nervous. You've changed. You're cold now. You're being harsh. You're being precise. You've stopped answering out of guilt. You've stopped engaging out of duty. You've stopped smiling just to ease their discomfort. That's not cruelty. That's discipline. You've learned the difference between empathy and entrapment. You've learned that helping everyone often means helping no one, especially not yourself. And more importantly, you've learned that your peace is not public property. Carl Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." And when you finally looked inside, you realized something tragic. You were showing up for everyone, but never for yourself. So now you show up quietly. deliberately, sparingly. Your presence is no longer a reflex. It's a decision. People say you've become colder, but really, you've just stopped leaking. You've stopped pouring yourself into broken vessels and calling it kindness. You've stopped softening your truth to keep others comfortable. You've stopped bleeding emotionally, just so someone else doesn't have to feel abandoned. And no, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Because the man who chooses inner clarity over external validation will always be misunderstood, but never truly defeated. Mirror question. When was the last time you withheld your energy not out of spite, but out of self-respect? They will notice. The moment you stop responding right away, the moment you stop showing up with that familiar smile, the moment your yes becomes a pause and then a quiet no, that's when it begins. Suddenly, you're the problem. You're distant. You're different. You're not who you used to be. Of course you're not, because the man you used to be didn't know what he was worth. And now that you do, people start panicking. The needer accuses you of being selfish. The manipulator plays victim. The judge says you're heartless. And the chameleon? They vanish because they can't reflect what they can't reach. What you're witnessing isn't grief. It's withdrawal. They're not sad because they miss you. They're angry because they miss the version of you that gave without question, without condition, without cost. But that version is gone. And in its place stands a man who finally understands. Silence is not absence. It's elevation. Because when you remove your energy from people who once fed on it, they starve. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually. And the echoes begin. You used to call, now it's quiet. You used to check in, now they're wondering. You used to explain, now they sit with their own discomfort and blame you for not fixing it. But let them sit. Let them stew. Let them feel the vacuum you left behind. Because that silence, that absence, that void, it's the sound of your value being recalibrated. You're not being cold. You're being clear. You're not abandoning them. You're abandoning the pattern. And if they only noticed your worth after you disappeared, they never valued you. They only consumed you. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. You used to be their distraction. Now you're their mirror. And not everyone can face what they see when they no longer have your warmth to hide behind. So they call you cruel. They call you selfish. They call you broken. But remember this, a boundary always feels like betrayal to the person who benefited from your lack of one. Mirror question. Who only realized your value when you stopped making yourself available? He doesn't chase. Not because he's cold, but because he finally understands. Anything that requires him to abandon himself is too expensive. He used to run toward approval, toward validation, toward love that felt just out of reach. And every time he got closer, it moved further. So he ran harder, loved louder, gave more, and shrank, until one day he stopped. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The man who doesn't chase is not detached. He's anchored. He knows that what's real will stay. What's aligned will resonate, and what's meant for him won't need to be begged for. He walks slower now, speaks less, observes more. He doesn't sell himself anymore, because he's no longer for sale. They call him hard to read, but he's not hiding. He's just done narrating his worth to people who can't hear anything outside of their own wants. His silence is not a tactic, it's a boundary. His presence is not a plea, it's a privilege. Carl Jung once said, solitude is not the absence of love, but its complement because it teaches you how not to need. This man has learned. He no longer needs to be liked. He no longer needs to be chosen. He no longer needs to explain his distance, because his life is no longer built on permission. It's built on principle. And his principle is simple. If love requires performance, it's not love. If connection demands sacrifice of self, it's not connection. He doesn't seek comfort in crowds. He finds power in stillness. You won't see him everywhere, but you'll feel him when he enters the room. Not because he's loud, but because his silence has gravity. He's the man who no longer chases, because what he was chasing was always himself. And now that he's found that, nothing else feels worth losing again. Mirror question: what would your life become if you stopped chasing approval and started trusting your silence?